Hi guys, Abdul Manan here. I'm a GP and medical director at Blue Peanut. I'm getting lots of calls right now from students and parents alike, having sat the UCAT test. They've got the scores, and they're asking questions like where should they apply to, how to make best use of the UCAT score. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about how to use your UCAT score strategically so that you up the chances of getting through to interviews. Over 18,000 people have sat the UCAT test this year already. I'm expecting that figure to double at least this year because the numbers are going to be up on last year's 35,000, something like that. It's because the competition is just getting higher. As you might know, universities use the UCAT score invariably. When they do, they kind of divvy you up into deciles. People ask me, well, what's a high decile? What's a good score? Well, generally speaking, your 8th and 9th decile, I'd say, are scores of about 2,800 plus. Below that, 6th and 7th decile, about 2.6 to 2.8, something like that. 5th decile or below tends to be about 2,650 and below. In our experience, what we find is that if you score 6th decile and above, your chances of getting through to interview is good or high. Anything below that, it's not impossible to get through to interviews, and we've had loads of students getting through to interviews, and I suppose that's why we need to talk and make sure you apply strategically if you've had scores lower than that. As regards to the situation judgment test section, that particular section, if you've had band 4, then really the chances of getting through to interview is probably nil. The band 3, again, it's difficult. Most universities are looking for band 1s and band 2s. So first thing, right, as regards to selecting your universities is to make sure that you fulfill their requirements for GCSEs or equivalent, all right? Next thing is make sure that you fulfill the requirements for A-level or equivalent requirements. Some universities use predicted grades and others don't, so make sure you factor that in. If, for example, you might be predicted a lower score, you might want to apply to universities that don't take into account predicted A-level, rather they rely on your GCSE results more. Once you've satisfied that bit, then you need to look at the UCAT score if you're applying to a UCAT university, and make sure that you won't be rejected from an interview based on your UCAT score, and that based on previous applicants and interviews, you might or you stand a good chance of getting through to interview. Certainly, you shouldn't rest on your laurels in regards to maybe, okay, I'll sit the BMAT and I'll do okay there. No, the evidence is that if you're scoring low in UCAT, you might score low in BMAT and vice versa. People who do well in the UCAT generally do better in BMAT as well. So I think you need to work with what you've got and really realistically ask yourself, can you get through to interview based on your UCAT score and of course your other accreditations like your GCSEs, predicted A-levels, and of course don't forget your personal statement, that needs to be sterling as well. Well, again, that's used invariably by universities. Some don't use it at all for interview process, but you need to make sure that is top notch. So coming back to the UCAT score, I mean, it's not a revelation that higher scores get you more interviews. Higher scores get you through to interview and therefore more chances of getting in. That's not to say that the lower scores won't get you to interview, but you need to choose strategically. Some universities take a more holistic approach. They don't just look at UCAT, they'll look at grades, they'll look at how you do in interviews and so forth. They have different levels of weighting. So my advice there is go through each. Once you've shortlisted your universities, go through each and every one of them to see where you have more realistic chance of getting an interview. Newer medical school, people ask me, well, some do interview students with lower scores and others don't. So again, make sure you don't just apply to 4 new schools and think you're okay. Be careful and research what they've done the previous years. So when I've done research into this area, you find that actually you can get hold of cutoff scores that universities have. Make sure you are above that. Make sure you're able to satisfy that requirement. Some universities use UCAT for tiebreaker situations, or they will use it more as a point of entry into the interview situation, of course. Now, in terms of other factors, right, as I've said before, make sure the other things are right. Personal statement, predicted A-levels or actual A-level grades you have, GCSE grades and so forth, because again, if you don't pass that area, the kind of academic requirements, so to say, you might fall foul of the whole thing. So again, this information is widely available online, so therefore we have no excuse but to research and apply strategically. Just to give you a few examples, right? Look at King's. When you look at the UCAT cutoff they had back in 2019, prior to the pandemic, it was 2,799. So if you've got a score of say 2,600, I might stay clear of King's. Look at Liverpool, for example. Applicants are ranked based on results of the admission tests, the UCAT. So, and then there's a certain number of bands that they will interview. If you look at Manchester, for example, the 2020-21 cutoff was 2,640. It was a bit lower for winding participation students, about 2,500. So again, bear that in mind. Do qualify for winding participation there as well, because you'll hopefully get through with lower scores. Newcastle, look at Newcastle in 2020, the cutoff point was 2,730. So it varies, the graduate entry was even more competitive at 2,910. So you need this kind of information to make a more informed choice. Sheffield, their cutoff was 2,430, and then they ranked the students and interviewed people according to that. St George's, for example, the cutoff was 2,620 in 2021. Bristol, it was about 2,830. It was really high. Glasgow, it's based on personal statement, references, and they have fewer applicants per place, so that's a place to look at as well. But again, you can't just assume they're easy to get into. Aberdeen, if you look at Aberdeen, for example, the average score they were looking at was 2,670, whereas for the rest of the UK, for non-Scottish students, it was 2,850. So again, you need to bear that in mind when you apply to Aberdeen. And just because some universities might have an acceptance for lower UCAT scores, it doesn't mean they're any easier as such to get into, because they might be weighting other things like your academic side. So make sure you fulfill that criteria if you're applying to their universities, because they will weight that more and mark and kind of score that more heavier, so to say. And if you don't meet those criterion, then you won't get through to interviews. So just because it's a lower UCAT score university doesn't mean it's easy to get through. A few examples to talk about, I guess. If you look at Plymouth, the cutoff for 2019 was 2,330. They didn't even look at the SJT band score, but then there's a huge emphasis on interviews and other requirements. If you look at Queen's, for example, in Belfast, the UCAT weighting was just 6 out of the 42 points to decide whether you get through to interview. So there was a heavy emphasis on other things, so do think about that. Sunderland, again, they score you for the UCAT score, and you need to be in the top 8 deciles of the total applicants, to get through. And your SJT also has to be above band 3. Aston University, or New University, they have a more blended approach. They look at both in equal parts. Birmingham, on the other hand, they look at 45% of your requirements from an academic perspective, and 35% weighting on the UCAT, and 20% is contextual. So make sure you get the contextual aspect right, because that's a big wedge of the equation. Exeter, for example, it's again weighted to create this score. And 25% of that comes from the UCAT or GAMSAT or whatever, and 75% on academic attainment. So you see it's heavy on the academic side. Kiel, low UCAT, again 2280, but they have lots of other requirements which you need to look. I hope you've got a kind of an insight as to what I'm trying to get at, is that basically just because you've got a low UCAT score does not generally mean that you can't get through to med school, all right, number one. Number two, it's important to realize that it may be a bit more challenging with a lower UCAT score, because generally you'll find people are ranking you, people are looking at the higher deciles to bring into interview. But you need to look at other requirements, academic requirements, contextual requirements, widening participation potentially. So look at all of these things and, scientifically have a solid approach to selecting your final 4. If you need more help, if you need more advice, do get in touch with us. Our website is www.bluepeanut.co.uk. My name is Dr. Abdul Manan, Medical Director at Blue Peanut. Thank you.